If you boot up Pokemon on your Game Boy and catch a Pikachu, it sounds like this. This one sound effect was used in the games up until the year 2012. But when you think of Pikachu's voice, you're likely imagining something very different.
Pikachu!
So, when and why did Pikachu's voice change so completely? And who gave the Pokemon its iconic voice? Let us answer the question, why doesn't Pikachu sound like he used to? Chapter 1. Before the Anime. It was 1996 when the original two Pokemon games, Pokemon Red and Green, were released in Japan. Developer Game Freak had actually been working on the games for 6 years, which is an unusually long time. The idea was to create a huge set of unique creatures, aka Pokemon, for players to catch and trade. Less than 10 Game Freak employees designed how those Pokemon looked, but there was another important part of their designs that had to be figured out: the voices. Which brings us to Junichi Masuda. Masuda is a composer and sound designer who's been with the Pokemon series since it began. I developed a program we called Sound Driver, he explained, in order to play music and sound in the games, and I also oversaw all the Pokemon voices. So it was Masuda's job, one of his many jobs, to go through each Pokemon and assign it a cry sound. However, as Pokemon Red and Green were being developed for the Game Boy, Masuda had some pretty tight constraints when it came to sound capabilities. He couldn't, for instance, record the sound of some kind of real-life animal. Instead, he had to synthesize all the sounds on the fly, using only 3 different sound channels. One sound channel can play one note or sound at any time, and Masuda only had 3 of them to create his animal-like noises. Now, the original Pokemon games have 151 Pokemon, but Masuda only actually created 38 different cry sound effects. He then sped these sounds up or slowed them down and raised or lowered their pitches in order to fill out the rest of the roster. So, check out Pikachu's cry sound. It's actually a slightly modified version of the cry used for 6 other Pokemon: Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite. So next time you play one of those old Pokemon games, see if you can hear the similarities. So that's how Pikachu's original voice came to be. For players around the world, this was the voice of Pikachu. But at Game Freak, the cogs were beginning to turn for a new voice of Pikachu. Chapter 2. Pikachu Speaks. After Pokemon Red and Green proved to be far more popular with Japanese players than Game Freak or Nintendo expected, Nintendo and Game Freak partnered with Japanese animation studio OLM to start work on a Pokemon TV anime. The original plan was for the show to last a year and a half, with this man, Kunihiko Yoyama, directing. One of Yoyama's first decisions was which starter Pokemon the main character should pick. He worried that regardless of whether Ash picked Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle, players who didn't pick the same starter Pokemon in the game would feel left out. And so, he decided to give the main character a completely different companion, Pikachu. Pikachu was already pretty popular in Japan at the time, so it seemed like a natural fit for Ash's companion. Now, with this being an anime, OLM had to hire voice actors for the show, so they started holding auditions. And this is where I need to introduce you to voice actress Ikue Otani. Otani had been working as a voice actor for about a decade, and was, and is, famous for her cutesy, high-pitched voice.
熱中症とかいないか？お前が誰か医者！あ、俺だ。
Now, in early 1997, Ikue Otani was called in to audition for the role of Meowth, the evil member of Team Rocket. So she picked up a script with Meowth's lines and headed to the audition. But when she got there, things turned out a little unexpectedly. As she explained, there were many other people auditioning for other parts, So when they called for Pikachu, all the people with Pikachu scripts went over. I didn't go because I didn't have the script. Then someone came over and told me to come, but I said I wasn't there for Pikachu. He said, "Yes, you are." There had been a misunderstanding. Ikue Otani thought she'd been called in to audition for Meowth, but all along the producers had wanted her to audition for Pikachu instead. Now, Otani didn't really know much about Pokemon at the time. In fact, no one at the audition did. In her words, "I didn't have a clue. There were Pokemon posters all over the room at the audition, and production officials were telling me that the characters were really popular among kids. All I could say was, oh, really?" The other voice actors auditioning for the roles had the same reaction. None of us knew how popular these characters really were. But role mix-ups and Pokemon confusion aside, Ikue Otani, with her cute voice and endearing audition performance, managed to get the role. At the time, the voice actor signed a 1-year contract, although Ikue Otani has been voicing Ash's Pikachu for 23 years now. Here's how she sounds.
Pika, Pika Pikachu! Pika, Pika Pikachu! Pika, Pika Pika!
Now, you might be surprised to learn that Pikachu was originally going to speak full sentences. Yeah, the original plan that anime studio OLM had was for the Pokemon to start out just making short noises, like saying their names, and then eventually they would learn how to speak full sentences. That's what Ikue Otani was told at the audition. So she was pretty disappointed when she learned that Game Freak had shot the idea down. Pikachu was supposed to learn a language, like a baby learns a language, and that's the way I was doing it at first, she explained. Then, a few months later, the producers told me Pikachu wasn't going to speak. At the time, I was disappointed. But because Pikachu doesn't speak Japanese, children all over the world can hear my voice. So it turned out okay. However, there was a catch. Ikue Otani's voice only appeared in the anime. In the games, Pikachu still sounded like this. So, what changed? Chapter 3, Pokemon Pikachu. So, after the Pokemon TV anime became a big success, developers Game Freak had an idea to develop a new Pokemon game that followed the story of the anime more closely, called Pokemon Yellow in English. And so, just like in the anime, the player's starter Pokemon would be Pikachu rather than Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle. Now, to try and match the anime, Game Freak began recording new cry sound effects for all 151 Pokemon with voice actors from the anime. They got 74 Pokemon in before they changed their minds. This was likely due to memory limits, as storing data for 151 unique audio clips on a tiny Game Boy cartridge would be practically impossible. So, instead, Game Freak changed their plans. Almost every Pokemon in the game would reuse the synthesized sound effects from Pokemon Red and Green, with only one exception: the player's Pikachu. Game Freak wanted to use Ikue Otani's voice in the game, so Ikue Otani was brought into the recording studio where she recorded over 40 different voice clips for the game. But next came the question of how to fit those voice clips into the Game Boy cartridge's limited storage space. And the man responsible for figuring out this problem was our old friend Junichi Masuda. He explained how he did it on his blog. He took each audio sample and compressed its bit depth down to 1 bit. Now, that sounds pretty technical, but what it essentially means is that rather than forming a nice smooth audio wave, at any given time, the audio sample can be either on or off. And here's how the audio wave looks if you do that. Now, obviously, this doesn't really look like a real-life audio wave, and yeah, the effect this extreme compression has on the sound is pretty striking. Here's how Pikachu sounded in Pokemon Yellow.
Pikachu! Pika, Pikachu! Pika, Pika! Pikachu!
Chapter 4, Pokemon X and Y. So, Pokemon Yellow was just a one-off. In the rest of the Pokemon series, Pikachu continued to use that original sound from 1996. But then, in 2013, all of that changed. Pokemon X and Y were the first Pokemon games released for the 3DS, and this meant a big technical change. All of the 2D Pokemon sprites were replaced with new 3D models. And alongside this big visual change, the game's new sound designer, Shota Kageyama, wanted to overhaul another aspect of the series, the Pokemon Cry sound effects. Up until this point, the original 151 Pokemon had continued using their original chiptune 8-bit sound effects from all the way back in the 90s. And Shota Kageyama, together with director Junichi Masuda, decided to finally change that. Once we decided to go with 3D Pokemon, said Masuda, I figured it was also time that we changed up the kind of electronic-sounding cries that a lot of the Pokemon had, something fresher and more animal-like to go with the improved hardware. So, all of the original 151 Pokemon sounds were changed to sound more animalistic. Changed though, not completely replaced. The new sound effects sounded close enough to the originals that people could still recognize them. With one exception, Pikachu. The cartoon's been on the air for 16 years and is shown in 83 countries, but everywhere you go, it's always Ikue Otani's voice for Pikachu, Junichi Masuda explained. You can go all around the world and ask people what Pikachu sounds like, and it will always be the pika from the anime. I figured that if that's how people see it, then that's how they'd probably like the game to be, too. And so, Pikachu's old voice was completely removed, replaced with a brand new one recorded by none other than Ikue Otani, the voice of Ash's Pikachu in the Pokemon anime. Here's how she sounds in Let's Go Pikachu from 2018.
Pika pika, pika pika, Pikachu, pika pika, pika pika.
So, I've seen people say that Ikue Otani is the most famous voice actor in the world. And, you know, that might be true. Other than Mario, how many characters use the same voice actor everywhere you go in the world? The number's pretty low, but it includes Pikachu. Now, to be clear, Ikue Otani is actually only the voice of Ash's Pikachu in the anime. Other Pikachus are voiced by other actors. But every single week, Ikue Otani comes into the anime studio to record new lines for the character. That's right. Other than when she went on maternity leave in 2006, Ikue Otani has always recorded new voice lines every single week for the Pokemon anime, just like any human character who appears in the show. There really are times when I want to take a vacation and get away from it all, Otani once said in an interview. But since the show is weekly, I have to be in the studio every week, so I can never take a long vacation. Because that's the thing. You might think it was easy being Pikachu. All Pikachu says is pika, pika. But that's actually what makes the character so hard to play. Other human characters can express their emotions through the words that they're speaking. But with Pikachu, everything has to be expressed through that simple pika sound. After going through all that effort, I think Ikue Otani deserves her status as potentially the world's most famous voice actor. Hey, thanks for watching to the end. I'm a huge fan of Ikue Otani. She also plays Chopper in One Piece and Mitsuhiko in Conan, both of which appear almost every week. With 3 big weekly roles lasting over 20 years, it's no wonder Otani finds it hard to take a holiday. See you next week.